Right, let me ask you, how do you feel at the moment? Do you feel okay? Do you feel well? Do you feel happy? Do you feel that you're coming out of the other side? I mean, God, I've got my fingers crossed and touching wood that we're coming out of the other side, but do you feel as we're coming out of the other side, okay? How are your finances? How is your employment? How are your businesses? And I ask you this because there is a report out today by the Institute for Fiscal Studies that has found that unemployment, real earnings growth, arrears on household bills and food bank use were all at similar levels to pre-pandemic. This, apparently, the IFS says, is an astonishing outcome given the scale of the economic disruption and loss of national income over the last 15 months. So let's have a chat and let's discuss that. So joining me now, Jonathan Cribb, who's the lead author of the study and the senior research economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and Dr. Ashley Frawley, who's a sociologist and author of the Semiotics of Happiness, should I say. Let me start with you, Jonathan. This report, is the output of this what you were expecting to see?
I didn't know what the answer would be, actually. We have some data collected by the University of Essex, which follows people through the pandemic. And the reason I didn't know what the answer would be is because clearly there's been a big shock to lots of people unable to work through the pandemic. But there have also been unprecedented levels of support through the furlough scheme, through the SACE scheme, through the increase to universal credit, and some employers are supporting their furloughed employees too. And so I just didn't know, and that's why it was exciting to intellectually to go and see what people were reporting about their own financial difficulties and how that has changed.
And what I would say, Dr. Frawley, is that whilst, for some people, things have remained kind of relatively okay throughout the situation, there are lots of people. So, I know that there's groups like people calling themselves like the excluded, self-employed, etc., that have been absolutely battered by this pandemic. And I would imagine that those guys are not feeling overly happy right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that the sort of headline kind of glosses over, but which of course is talked about in the results of the within the report, is that while overall things are similar to before the pandemic, within the population there are certain groups that have done very, very poorly. And of course, it's not surprising to learn that it's those who were struggling before that have struggled even more. And in fact, there was this kind of internet meme that was going around, I guess it was on Twitter, that said, there never was a lockdown. There was middle-class people hiding while working-class people brought them things. It wasn't necessarily a lockdown for everyone. Not everyone was able to work from home. A lot of people lost their jobs, obviously, and fell through the cracks of furlough schemes. And those people will be hidden within what is an overall kind of similar picture. And that overall similar picture may also be masking some wealth distribution that may have gone upwards, because it's definitely the poorest in society that have suffered the most.
And Jonathan, I'm just looking at the outcome of this report now, where it's talking about the families that are in work poverty. What's the situation like for that group?
So those in work poverty have been one of the groups that have found it most difficult over the last 15 months. It's for a number of reasons. They start from a less financially secure base, and the kind of jobs that people in work poverty often do have often been those that have been most affected by the pandemic. And just generally, if you are on a low income, it's often, for example, because there's only one earner in the household. More middle or high income households often have, a husband and a wife, or a mother and a father in work at the same time. If one of them loses their job or is furloughed, they have the potential support of their partner. And that often happens much less in poor working families. And so it's been a very difficult time for many people, including this group. And those are some reasons why.
Yeah, and Dr. Frawley, it has been a challenging time for lots of people, but for some people, they've received, what some would say, some very generous help from the government, but that is all due to end imminently. And what do you think will happen once that kind of support is tapered off and then ultimately removed?
Yeah, I think obviously the government has papered over some of the worst or potentially worst effects of the pandemic. And as that support tapers off, as you say, the real results may become visible. And I think, if we don't see any kind of recovery in devastated industries, the service sector, the high street, then we're going to see people unable to recover those jobs, people who are unable to find jobs, stuck in that same situation, and small businesses that were not able to continue. That's it. You go out of business, and so I think one of the things that we have to kind of pay attention to is that the government has stepped in and ensured that there was a safety net there, that people did not fall into poverty. At least many people, a very, very large number of people. And yet we have to make sure that in the coming months and years, we push for regeneration, investment, productive investment, because that is what's going to ultimately help people recover, help the economy recover, help jobs recover. And also, it's just worthwhile to say that living off of the government is not necessarily something that people aspire to. It's a good thing that that safety net is there, but for most people, that's their worst case scenario. Doing something productive and creative is how most human beings find meaning in life. And they have done so throughout history. And we need to make sure that when we push for a better deal and when we push for recovery, it's not, defaulting to kind of government safety nets. We need to make sure that we have creative industries. We need to make sure that we have industry, we have productive investment. We are actually doing and making things and providing opportunities for people.
Indeed. Okay, Jonathan Cribb and Dr. Ashley Frawley there. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening.